They flattened my hill for their view. And the thing is, I didn't even realize it right away. Nobody knocked on my door. Nobody left a note. No warning flags. No orange tape. Nothing. Just one morning, after a long, steady rain, I stepped outside with my coffee like I always did, and something fell off in a way I couldn't explain yet, like when you walk into a room and know something's been moved, but you can't point to it. At first it was the sound, or maybe the lack of it. That hill behind my place used to muffle everything. The distant traffic, the occasional truck grinding up Ridgeway Road. Even the wind had a different tone when it rolled over that slope. But that morning the air felt thinner, like the sound had somewhere new to travel. And then I noticed the water. For years, rainwater had behaved like it understood the land. It would roll down the back slope, slow at the base, gather itself into this shallow basin behind my fence line, and just sit there, soaking in like it belonged. I'd watched it do that through storms that rattled windows and storms that barely whispered, always the same, predictable, almost comforting. But that morning it didn't stop. It cut across my yard like it had somewhere urgent to be, fast and muddy, carving a line through grass that had never been touched before, like someone had redrawn the map overnight without telling me. I remember just standing there in my boots, coffee going cold in my hand, watching that water move and thinking, no, that's not right. That's never been right. So I followed it. I set the mug down on the porch railing and walked out, boots sinking a little deeper with every step, the ground softer than it should have been. And as I moved uphill, that uneasy feeling turned into something sharper, something closer to anger, because the further I went, the less it looked like nature and the more it looked like intention. The slope behind my house wasn't worn down, it was cut. Clean lines, straight edges, soil pushed into uneven ridges like someone had taken a blade to it. Grass wasn't flattened, it was gone, ripped up, roots exposed and drying in clumps. And the hill wasn't a hill anymore, not the way I knew it. It was lower, noticeably lower. Now that might not sound like much unless you've lived with a piece of land long enough to know it's shaped the way you know your own face. But that hill had been there longer than me, longer than my parents who'd bought this place back when Ridgeway wasn't even paved. It wasn't just dirt, it was a boundary. It gave me privacy without fences, quiet without asking for it, a sense that my space was mine even if the world sat just beyond it. And now, standing there in the mud, I realized that boundary had been shaved down like it was nothing. I climbed a little higher, and that's when it hit me, because suddenly I could see them. Up on the ridge, where there used to be a line of scrub and old fencing, there were houses now. New ones, big ones, clean white siding, glass railings, wide decks that stretched out like they were reaching for something. And on one of those decks, there was a man standing there, holding a mug, leaning forward just slightly, elbows resting like he was comfortable, like he belonged there. And he was looking straight down. At me. Or maybe not at me exactly. More like through me, like I was part of the view he'd paid for. That's when everything snapped into place. The hill wasn't just cut, it was cut for them. I stood there longer than I should have, just taking it in, the way the line of sight had opened up, the way my backyard, my space, now sat exposed like some kind of extension of their property, and I could feel this slow burn building in my chest, not loud, not explosive, just steady and certain. Because nobody had asked. Nobody had even tried to pretend this was okay. They just decided. So I walked the edge, and that's where I found the tracks. Deep, heavy impressions pressed into the soil, the kind you only get from machines that don't ask permission. Fresh dirt still loose around them, edges not yet softened by time or weather. I crouched down, ran my hand along one of those grooves, and it felt recent. Like I just missed it. Like this had happened days ago, maybe hours. No markers, no flags, no indication this was anything but quiet theft done with loud equipment. I followed those tracks uphill until I heard the engine. Low at first, then louder, that mechanical growl echoing off what was left of the slope, and when I crested the rise, I saw it. An excavator sitting there like it owned the place, arm extended, bucket dragging through dirt that I knew for a fact wasn't theirs. And next to it, a guy in a reflective vest, hard hat tilted back just enough to show he wasn't worried about anything at all. I didn't yell. I didn't rush. I just walked up and waited until he noticed me. He shut the machine down, slow and casual, like this was just another conversation in a long day of routine work, and when he climbed down, He gave me that look people give when they assume you're about to ask a dumb question. What's going on here? I asked. He wiped his hands on his jeans, glanced back at the slope like he was proud of it. Grading work, he said. Improving the view. Improving the view. I let that sit for a second. Whose view? He didn't even hesitate. Just pointed uphill with his thumb. New development up there. Folks paid good money. I followed his gesture. Even though I already knew what I'd see, those decks, that man with the coffee, that open line straight into my land, and something in me tightened just a little more. You cut into my property, I said, keeping my voice even. He shook his head like I'd misunderstood. Nah, man. It's a shared slope. Developer cleared it with the plans. A shared slope. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how easy he said it, like ownership was just a suggestion. I looked back at the ground, at the clean cuts, the displaced soil, the way the water had already started rewriting its path, and I knew right then this wasn't some small mistake. This was deliberate, calculated, signed off by someone who figured I either wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight it. And maybe for a second, standing there with mud on my boots and a stranger telling me my land wasn't mine, I wondered which one they were counting on. Then I straightened up, met his eyes, and said, You're going to want to shut this down. He smirked, just a little. You can take that up with the developer. Oh, I said, turning already, I planned to. And as I walked back down that broken slope, past the tracks and the water that refused to stay where it belonged, I could feel something settling in. Not panic, not confusion, something colder, more focused. Because they hadn't just moved dirt. They'd crossed a line, and I knew exactly where that line was. I didn't go back inside right away. I stood there at the edge of what used to be my hill, watching that muddy water keep moving like it had found a shortcut through something that used to stand in its way. And I remember thinking how strange it is that you can feel something's been taken from you before you even measure it, like your body knows before your brain catches up. Then I went in, wiped my boots on the mat out of habit more than anything, and pulled the folder from the bottom drawer in the kitchen, the one with all the paperwork my dad used to keep organized in a way that made sense only to him, but somehow still made sense to me now. I spread everything out on the table. Old surveys, newer ones from when I refinanced a few years back, property tax maps, notes in the margins that I hadn't looked at in ages, and I started tracing lines with my finger, slow and careful, like I didn't trust my own eyes yet. And there it was, exactly where it had always been. That boundary line didn't curve, didn't shift, didn't leave room for interpretation. It ran straight through the section they'd just carved down like it belonged to someone else. I checked it again, then again. Same result every time. They didn't improve anything, I said out loud, even though nobody was there to hear it. They took it. Now I could have marched back up there and made a bigger scene, maybe gotten into it with the guy running the excavator, but that wouldn't have fixed anything. If anything, it would have given them a reason to paint me as the problem. And I had a feeling, call it instinct, call it experience, that whoever was behind this was used to people folding, or at least slowing down long enough for things to become permanent. I wasn't interested in giving them that kind of time. So I made a call. Actually, I made a few, but the one that mattered was to the county office. And I chose my words carefully, because words matter in situations like this more than volume ever will. I didn't say they're messing with my land. I said unauthorized grading. I said soil displacement beyond surveyed boundaries. I said drainage alteration affecting private property. Each one of those phrases has weight to it, a kind of gravity that pulls attention in a way complaints don't. The woman on the other end got quiet for a second after I said all that, like she was already picturing paperwork. We'll send someone out, she said. Tomorrow. Tomorrow was good. Tomorrow meant this hadn't settled yet. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was worried, exactly, but because my mind kept running through possibilities, angles, outcomes, what they'd say, how they'd spin it, whether they'd already filed something I didn't know about. Around midnight, I stepped out onto the porch again, looked up at those houses on the ridge, a few lights still on, silhouettes moving behind glass like they were part of a different world entirely. And I wondered if any of them knew. If the guy with the coffee that morning had any idea that the ground beneath his view didn't belong to the people who sold it to him, or if he just didn't care. The next morning, the inspectors showed up right on time. 2 of them, county trucks, clipboards, the kind of presence that changes the tone of a place without anyone raising their voice. I met them halfway up the slope, walked them through what I'd seen, showed them the water path, the cuts, the tracks. One of them, older guy, sun-worn face, didn't say much, just kept nodding, taking photos from different angles, measuring distances with a tape that snapped back with a sharp click every time. Any permits posted? He asked at one point. Not a single one, I said. He glanced at the other inspector, then back at me. All right. We walked a little farther up, closer to where the excavator had been working, and right on cue, the machine was there again, engine idling, like they'd just picked up where they left off. The operator saw us this time, though, and you could see the shift immediately, that easy confidence from the day before replaced with something tighter, more cautious. The older inspector stepped forward, held up a hand. Shut it down. No debate. No delay. Just done. There's something about authority when it's used properly. It doesn't need to be loud. They posted the notice right there on the equipment, bright and impossible to ignore. Stop work order. Big red letters. The kind of thing that travels fast in a development where people are paying attention to anything that might affect their investment. And just like that, the noise stopped. The digging stopped. The illusion that this was all just routine work stopped. By the time I walked back down to my place, I could already feel the shift rippling outward. It didn't take long for the call to come. Late afternoon, phone buzzing on the counter while I was rinsing mud off my boots in the sink. Unknown number. I dried my hands, let it ring once more before picking up. Mr. Callahan? The voice said, smooth, practiced, the kind that's used to smoothing things over. Who's asking? This is Victor Hale. I'm the project manager for the Ridgeway Crest development. Of course he was. What can I do for you, Victor? I said, leaning against the counter. There was a pause, just long enough to signal he was choosing his approach. I understand there's been a bit of a misunderstanding regarding some grading work near your property line. A misunderstanding, I repeated, glancing out the window toward the slope that wasn't what it used to be. That's one way to put it. We've already paused operations while we review the situation, he continued, still calm, still controlled. From what I've been told, the area in question was believed to be part of a shared slope. It wasn't, I said. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Well, he said, adjusting, these things can get complicated, especially with older surveys. My surveys match. I cut in, not raising my voice, just removing the room he was trying to create. Old and new. Same line. You crossed it. Silence. Not empty. Calculating. All right, he said finally, tone shifting just a fraction. Let's assume for a moment that there was an overstep. We're more than willing to address it. We can smooth the affected area, reseed, make sure everything looks clean and presentable again. Presentable. Like this was about appearance. I don't want it presentable, I said. I want it back. That may not be entirely feasible, he replied, and there it was, the first crack in that polished voice. Rebuilding the original grade would involve significant cost, equipment, time. Sounds expensive, I said. It is, he admitted. I let a small pause hang there, just long enough for him to wonder which direction I'd go. Then I guess you should have thought about that before you started digging. That landed. I could tell. Mr. Callahan, he said, a little more direct now. We're trying to resolve this amicably. So am I replied. That's why I called the county before I called a lawyer. Another silence. He hadn't expected that order of operations. Let me come by, he said after a moment. We can discuss this in person. You can, I said, after I mark my property. And that's exactly what I did. The next morning, I brought in a surveyor, not the cheapest option, not the fastest, but the kind of guy who double-checks everything because his name is tied to it. We walked the entire boundary together, driving stakes deep into the ground at every key point, bright tape tied high enough to catch the eye from a distance. There was nothing subtle about it. This wasn't a suggestion. This was a line made visible. Then I added something else. Temporary fencing. Not because I needed it, not before all this, but now. Now it served a purpose. We ran it straight along that boundary, cutting across the freshly open line of sight like a scar that refused to heal quietly, right through what had clearly been designed, and probably advertised, as a clean, unobstructed view from those expensive decks above. By the time we finished, I stepped back and looked at it, that fence standing there where the hill used to rise, and I'll admit, there was a part of me that felt something close to satisfaction. Not because I like conflict, but because for the first time since I'd seen that water moving where it shouldn't, It felt like the balance had shifted. It didn't take long for the reactions to start. People notice when their view changes, especially when they've paid for it. I saw them up there again later that afternoon. Different faces this time, some pointing, some talking. A couple of them walking the length of their decks like they were trying to figure out how something that had been open yesterday was now blocked. And even from that distance, you could read the confusion, the irritation, the questions forming. Good, because questions travel. And when they start reaching sales offices and real estate agents, when buyers start asking why there's a fence cutting through what they were told was part of the landscape, things slow down. Deals hesitate. Confidence wavers. Exactly the kind of pressure that makes someone like Victor Hale reconsider what's not feasible. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, he was standing on my porch. He showed up mid-morning, not in a suit like I half expected, but in jeans and a button-down with the sleeves rolled up, like he was trying to meet me somewhere in the middle between business and neighbor. Victor Hale. He looked like the kind of guy who'd spent a long time getting people to say yes without realizing they'd been cornered into it. And for a second, I wondered how many times that had worked before this. I didn't invite him in. I stepped out onto the porch, closed the door behind me, and let him take in the view, or what was left of it now that the fence cut clean across that open line like a sentence nobody could ignore. He nodded toward it. That's quite a statement. It's a boundary, I said. He gave a small smile, like he appreciated the phrasing even if he didn't like what it meant. Fair enough. He shifted his weight, glanced up toward the ridge where a couple of figures were already lingering on one of those decks, watching us in that subtle not subtle way people do when they think they're being discreet. You've made your point. I'm not trying to make a point, I said. I'm trying to fix a problem. There it was again, that pause, that recalibration behind his eyes. He wasn't here to dismiss this anymore. The calls he'd been getting, the questions from buyers, the tension creeping into his timeline, it had caught up with him. I owe you an apology, he said finally, and this time it sounded closer to real. What happened out here shouldn't have happened the way it did. No, I said. It shouldn't have happened at all. He nodded, took that in without arguing. We relied on an internal assumption about the slope boundary. Clearly, that assumption was wrong. That's one word for it. He exhaled through his nose, not quite a sigh, more like someone accepting the shape of a conversation they couldn't steer anymore. I'd like to resolve this properly, he said. We can offer compensation, financial, or improvements to your property, landscaping, drainage upgrades, whatever you feel is appropriate. I leaned against the porch railing, looked past him at the cut in the land. The way the hill still felt unfinished, like a sentence that had been interrupted. You keep talking about improving things, I said. That's not what I want. Then help me understand what you do want. I looked him straight in the eye. I want the hill back. No hesitation this time. No soft deflection. Just the truth sitting there between us. He held my gaze for a second, then glanced away toward the slope again, doing the math in his head, the cost, the logistics, the impact on his project, the conversations he'd have to have with people above him who didn't like hearing the word redo. That's a substantial request, he said carefully. It's my land, I replied. It's not a request. Another beat. Then he nodded, slow. If we were to consider that, he said, choosing each word like it mattered now, we'd need to ensure that the restored grade meets current safety and drainage standards. We'd need engineering, oversight. I don't care how you do it. I cut in. I care that it's done right. Back to where it was. Not close. Not good enough. Exactly. He studied me for a moment, like he was trying to figure out if there was any room left to negotiate around the edges. There wasn't. I think he saw that. And the fence? He asked, nodding toward it. That stays until the work is done. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not frustration exactly. More like respect mixed with inconvenience. You understand what that's doing to our sales. I do, I said. That's why it's there. For a second, neither of us said anything. The wind moved through what was left of the grass, carrying a faint echo of voices from the ridge. People talking, probably about us, about this, about how something they thought they'd bought had just changed without warning. Finally, he nodded again. All right, he said. We'll rebuild it. Just like that. Simple words, heavy weight. And one more thing, I added. He looked back at me. Of course. I want a no-cut zone recorded on my deed. Permanent. No future assumptions. No reinterpretations. No one coming back 5 years from now thinking they can shave it down again because it's convenient. That one took longer. I could see it in his face. The realization that this wasn't just about fixing a mistake. It was about closing a door he might have wanted open later. That would require legal. I've got time, I said. He let out a quiet breath, then gave a small, resigned nod. All right, we'll include it. And just like that, the conversation shifted from whether this would happen to how. The next few weeks were something else to watch. Truck after truck rolled in, hauling soil that looked out of place at first, like it didn't belong there, until it did. Machines came back, but not with that careless, cutting confidence from before. This time they moved slower, more deliberate, guided by survey markers and engineers who double-checked everything like they knew eyes were on them now. Because they were. Mine, for one. I spent a lot of time out there during those days, sometimes sitting on the porch, sometimes walking the line, watching as the shape of that hill slowly returned. Not all at once, not dramatically, but layer by layer, lift by lift, like someone undoing a decision they couldn't take back any other way. And something strange happened as it rose. The houses up there, they started to disappear again. At first, it was subtle, the lower edges of those decks dipping out of sight, the figures standing on them becoming less distinct, like they were being pulled back into their own world. Then the glass railings caught less of the light, then less of the sky, until one afternoon I looked up and realized I couldn't see them at all unless I walked partway up the slope myself. The line had closed. The view was gone. I remember standing there that day, boots planted in dirt that finally felt like mine again, watching a crew lay down the last stretch of grass, green against the fresh soil, and feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't realized had been off balance since the morning I saw that water run wrong. Not triumph, exactly. Not even satisfaction in the way people usually mean it. More like alignment. Things back where they belonged. When the final inspection happened, the same older inspector came out. He walked the slope again, slower this time, tape measure in hand, checking elevations, drainage paths, the way the water would move when the next storm came through. He didn't say much, just like before, but at the end he gave a small nod and signed off on it. Looks like it used to, he said. That's the idea, I replied. A few days later, the fence came down. Not because I was told to, not because anyone asked, but because it had done its job. The boundary was still there, marked properly now, recorded in a way that didn't leave room for interpretation. It didn't need to be visible anymore to be respected. Life went back to something close to normal. The rain came again, not long after, one of those steady overnight storms that used to put me to sleep and now, for the first time in a while, did again. And in the morning, I stepped out with my coffee, same as always, and watched the water roll down that hill, slow at the base, gather itself, and stop. Right where it always had. Like it remembered. Now, here's the part one still think about sometimes, more than I expected I would. A week or so after everything was finished, I saw that same guy again. The one with the coffee on the deck, the one who'd been looking down like my land was part of his morning routine. I was out near the edge of the slope, checking a patch of grass that hadn't quite taken yet, when I felt that sense of being watched again. I looked up. He was there. Same spot. Same mug. But this time, he couldn't see me the same way. The hill stood between us again, not completely blocking him if he leaned just right, but enough that whatever easy, open view he'd had before it was gone. And for a second, we just looked at each other across that distance, both of us aware of what had changed and why. He raised his mug slightly, like a quiet acknowledgement. I didn't wave back, not out of spite, just didn't feel necessary. Because here's the thing, people keep asking me if it was worth it. The time, the hassle, the tension with the development, all of that. And yeah, part of me could have taken the money, let them smooth it over, pretended it didn't matter as much as it did. Would have been easier, cleaner, probably quieter. But every time it rains now, and I watch that water stop where it's supposed to, I think about how easy it is for something small to get taken if nobody pushes back. Not just land, but lines. Boundaries. The quiet understandings that keep people from stepping over each other just because they can. And I wonder, if I hadn't said anything, if I'd just let it go, how much more of that hill would have disappeared over time? Or whose yard would have been next? So now I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have fought it the same way? Or taken the deal and moved on? Where do you draw that line between keeping the peace and keeping what's yours? Let me know down in the comments. I read more of them than you'd probably expect. And if you made it this far, Hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because stories like this, they're a lot more common than people think.